Alistair Croke first came to the Rollright Stones by accident. He had been driving through the Cotswolds with no real destination in mind, following smaller roads that wandered between fields without explanation. When he saw the sign for the Stones, he turned almost without thinking, as though the lane itself had suggested it. He parked in a shallow lay-by and walked the short distance to the site. It was quieter than he expected. No voices, no movement beyond the soft stir of grass and leaves. The Stones stood in their familiar groupings. The King's men arranged in a broad circle, the whispering knights leaning together nearby, and the lone King Stone standing apart, slightly removed from the rest. Alistair did not believe in curses, but he did believe in places that made certain thoughts feel more likely. He walked slowly, keeping to the path. The Stones did not announce themselves. Their presence was steady, uninterested in being impressive. At the edge of the King's men, he paused. In the dimming light, the circle looked less like a monument and more like something unfinished, a decision interrupted and never corrected. He wondered briefly what it would feel like to stand inside it after dark. The thought was mild. Then he felt it, the faintest tug of attention, as though someone had spoken his name very softly from behind him. He turned. No one stood there. The grass shifted. A bird lifted from the hedge and vanished. Alistair exhaled, amused with himself, and continued on. He walked toward the whispering knights. Up close, they leaned together like figures in quiet discussion, their shadows merging at their bases. Alistair found himself lowering his voice without realizing it. It felt impolite to speak aloud. When he stepped away, he noticed his footprints in the grass were barely visible. The ground looked dry enough to hold them, yet the blades sprang back almost immediately, smoothing themselves as though disturbance were unwelcome. He told himself it meant nothing. He moved on to the King's Stone. It was taller than he expected, its surface rough and irregular. Alistair placed his hand against it. Cool. Then, beneath that, the suggestion of warmth. Not sun-warmed, but something older, like heat remembered rather than held. He withdrew his hand at once. A strange idea came to him then, that the stone knew the difference between a hand that touched briefly and one that lingered. The light was fading quickly now. Shadows pooled between stones. Alistair checked his phone, but the screen would not wake. He frowned and put it away. He should leave, he thought. Instead, he found himself walking back toward the King's men. The stones seemed closer together than before, not by much. Just enough that the space between them felt tighter, more deliberate. Alistair walked the perimeter slowly, counting without meaning to. He lost count and began again. At the point where he had first approached, the grass lay flattened, as though someone had been standing there. The certainty came to him without drama. Someone else had been here. Not earlier, not yesterday, just now. He turned slowly. There was no one. But the silence felt heavier, shaped, as though holding its breath. Alistair forced himself to move, reminding himself that the lane was close. He turned back toward the exit. Halfway along the path, he stopped. The whispering knights were angled differently, not displaced, not rearranged, turned. As though the conversation they had been holding had shifted, and one of them had leaned toward a new speaker. Alistair swallowed. If they can turn once, the thought came calmly, they can turn again. He walked faster, refusing to look back. The gap in the trees was gone, not blocked, simply reduced, rearranged into a narrow passage that did not feel like an exit at all. Alistair stopped, heart steady but cold, and turned back toward the stones. They stood as before. For a moment, relief washed through him. Then he noticed the King's Stone again. It was not leaning, it was turning, not visibly, not with motion, but with intention. The face of it had altered just enough that Alistair no longer felt he was looking at the same surface he had touched earlier. He stepped back. The grass beneath his foot flattened and stayed flat. He looked down. The print was not his. It was larger, deeper, its edges softened by time. A footprint pressed into the earth long ago and only now revealed, waiting. A childhood story surfaced in his mind. A king and his men turned to stone by a curse, halted mid-march. A tale repeated because it belonged to the land. But standing there, Alistair understood something else. The story was not about punishment, it was about interruption. The king had been stopped mid-step, mid-turn, mid-decision, and unfinished things did not fade. They waited. He backed away slowly, moving toward the king's men. Inside the circle, perhaps, there would be order, shape, boundary. At the edge of the stones, he stopped. The grass held more impressions, not fresh footprints, but revealed ones. A ring of them, evenly spaced, facing inward. Men had once stood here. The circle was not stones arranged like men. It was men arranged like stones. A formation. And formations had purpose. Alistair felt the fear settle, heavy and calm. The place did not want him to run. It wanted him to choose. A faint scrape came from the whispering nights. Stone against stone. They were closer together now, preparing. Alistair did not run. He stepped into the circle. The ground inside the ring felt subtly different beneath his feet. Not softer, not firmer. Simply more aware, as though the earth recognized the weight placed upon it. Alistair stood very still, conscious of how precisely he occupied the space. He noticed then that the impressions in the grass were not random. Each was aligned, facing inward, angled toward the center where he now stood. They were not marks left by wandering. They were positions. Alistair became acutely aware of his own posture, the way his shoulders were set, the balance of his stance. He had the unsettling sense that if he shifted too far in any direction, he would be correcting something long out of place. The stones themselves did not move, yet he felt with absolute certainty that their attention had narrowed, not focused on his face or his hands, but on his presence, the fact of him occupying a space that had been measured before. A thought surfaced, uninvited but calm. The circle did not require completion. It only required continuity. Alistair realized then that stepping inside had not been a test. It had been an answer. He wondered briefly how long one could stand there before becoming indistinguishable from the thing being stood among. The idea did not arrive with panic, but with a slow, suffocating logic, as though the circle were not asking him to remain forever, only to remain long enough. The air inside felt held, contained. His breathing sounded too loud, too alive. The stones did not move, but he knew they were aware of him now, the way a room becomes aware of a flame. He closed his eyes. He saw the circle from above, the king stone turning endlessly, never reaching its final face. The whispering nights adjusting their lean by fractions, and himself, standing exactly where he stood, his feet fitting perfectly into the earth's remembered shapes. When he opened his eyes, the lane was there, wide, ordinary. Alistair did not question it. He left at an even pace, careful not to hurry. He found his car and drove away without looking back. He did not return. But years later, when he heard the stones mentioned casually, he would feel something mark itself inside him, a quiet recognition, like a tally being kept, because he understood now what the curse truly was. Not that men were turned to stone, but that stone, given time, could learn the shape of a man. And once it learned you, it did not forget. Please subscribe to this channel to be alerted to the next episode of Ghosts of the Cotswolds.